He gave us the most spectacular bridges, the longest tunnels, incredible ships, and the greatest railways.
I'm on a journey around Britain to tell the story of perhaps our greatest engineer of all time, Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
He was a charismatic character who pushed the boundaries of engineering to the absolute limit. In the middle of the 19th century, Brunel was at the forefront of an industrial explosion that changed the world.
He's 20 years old and he's running the biggest and most famous construction site in the world.
Brunel was fiercely demanding of all those around him. But delving into his personal archive, I discover another side to the engineering genius.
So this is Isambard Kingdom Brunel's private diary. He's worried. He's worried about what's going to happen to him in the future.
I'm now retracing his steps to discover the man and the engineer. This is the fascinating story of the man who built Britain. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, one of the most famous names of the Victorian era. An engineering genius who transformed Britain during the explosive years of the Industrial Revolution. A man whose obsession with his phenomenal engineering projects eventually killed him. Immortalized in this iconic image, who was the real man in the stovepipe hat with the large cigar? My journey to uncover the true story of Isambard Kingdom Brunel begins here in the East End of London. This is a train journey that millions of people make every year, pretty much without thinking. Tap in, go through the barriers, and descend the spiral staircase to the platforms 50 feet below.
Now this is Wapping Station on the London Overground network. And passengers getting on a train from this platform are about to go under the river heading south. And whether they know it or not, they're about to go through one of the greatest ever feats of engineering.
This tunnel under the River Thames was where Isambard Kingdom Brunel cut his engineering teeth. Brunel was born in Portsmouth in 1806. His French father, Mark, had fled the revolution, eventually becoming an important engineer for the Royal Navy. He wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, and Isambard's first big project was to work as his father's assistant, creating the first ever tunnel under a river. Not just any river, but the River Thames through the heart of the capital. Back in Brunel's day, the Thames was home to the greatest port in the world. Ships were everywhere, and getting across the river had become a serious problem. The main route across was London Bridge, and it was frequently jammed, forcing traffic and business to a standstill. The need for a tunnel was obvious, but building one seemed impossible.
The big problem was that the Thames riverbed, right above me now, is made of mud and clay and quicksand. Digging a tunnel through such dangerously soft ground was a challenge that had defeated everyone. Until the Brunels came along. Before the Brunels could start building their tunnel, they needed to dig out and construct two huge shafts that would descend deep down into the earth below the level of the riverbed. One on the north side of the Thames at Wapping, and the other on the south side, here at Rotherhithe.
The Rotherhithe shaft was the first one to be created, and work started here in March 1825. Today, on the very site of that shaft, is the Brunel Museum.
How did the Brunels build these shafts that they needed to then dig out the tunnel?
Well, this is Can you hear the train beneath us?
I can feel it as well,
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
rumbling away.
Yeah. This is a pastry cutter. This is a 1,000-ton pastry cutter. 1,000 tons of solid brick. It was 50 feet tall, 50 feet in diameter, built on an iron ring and sunk under its own weight into the soft earth. So where we're now standing used to be above the ground.
So the weight of all that brick in the tower is actually going to force the pastry cutter down through the earth as it's excavated inside.
Exactly. And above the 1,000 tons of solid brickwork are pumping engines giving extra weight, and this slowly sunk.
So that brick we can see up there is now the walls of the shaft in here.
That's right.
It's genius.
It's genius.
Once both shafts had been sunk to the required depths, the work to tunnel through the riverbed and join them up began. Creating a tunnel through such a soft riverbed had never been done before. But Isambard's father, Mark, came up with an ingenious idea, inspired, bizarrely, by a sailor's worst enemy at the time.
Now this is Teredo nivalis, or to give it its more common name, the shipworm. And these little critters burrow their way deep into a ship's timbers. Then, once digested, the worm excretes a form of goo, creating a tunnel behind it. And you can see it here on this small piece of fossilized wood. There's the hole right through there as the worm has eaten its way, burrowed its way through the timber. And then here, around it, this perfect circle, the perfect tunnel lining.
Based purely on this, Mark Brunel patented what he called his Great Shield to attempt to dig his tunnel under the Thames. When work began later in 1824, he took on his son Isambard as his assistant. He was just 19 years old. He would help oversee the operation of the tunneling shield. But how did it work? A framework of cages was constructed, each one just big enough to hold one man. In front of each man were a series of small horizontal wooden boards. The worker would remove one board, dig out a few inches of clay and replace the board. Once all the men had done this, the entire shield was inched forward using screw jacks. The debris was removed by workers behind the men digging, and a brick lining was put in place to secure the tunnel. It was a complex and unprecedented operation, but Mark Brunel trusted his teenage son to oversee it. No wonder. He'd been preparing Isambard to be an engineer from the day he was born. At the Brunel Institute in Bristol, they hold a treasure trove of Isambard's life. Letters, diaries, notebooks and drawings that reveal as much about the man as the engineer.
Hey Nick, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Head of collections is Nick Booth.
What's this one here, Nick?
So this is the earliest object we have in our collection that's relating to Isambard Brunel, and it's a pencil drawing of a horse. We think it's a rocking horse, and it was made when he was aged 6.
That is phenomenal. I mean, the attention to detail is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, accurate as well, anatomically accurate. It's really amazing, isn't it? So his father, Mark Brunel, was teaching him how to draw, we think. So this is sort of where it's coming from. But this is all him.
I mean, it just goes to show, even at that early age, that kind of creative flair.
Yeah, the early signs of genius. It really is amazing.
Mark Brunel continued to push his son throughout his early years, introducing him to a wide range of skills and broadening his education.
He taught him to draw a perfect circle, for instance. He gave him blocks to play with so that he could start building structures. And crucially, he sent him to France to be educated, because at that time, the French education was far more technical than education here. So Brunel did technical drawing, he did maths to a very high level. So by the time he came back here, he was head and shoulders above a lot of other engineers in his technical ability.
With the building of the Thames Tunnel came Isambard's chance to show off that ability. But it was a highly dangerous project that would test Brunel and his workers to the absolute limit. At just 19 years old, Isambard Kingdom Brunel was about to get his first experience of a major engineering project. Assisting his father, Mark, he was put in charge of the tunnelling shield, where workmen were digging the new Thames Tunnel. It was the first ever under a river.
The conditions for the men digging the tunnel down there, what were they like?
Oh, it was terrible. The wooden planks kept back the soft earth, but not the water. So the Thames is coming through the gaps between the planks, and that wouldn't be pleasant today. But in 1825, this is the biggest open sewer in the world. So the men in the cages are being showered with sewage, with effluent.
I mean, that sounds like hell on earth.
It must have been just the worst job, and in appalling, cramped conditions.
Although conditions have much improved from Brunel's day, the tunnelling shield is still the basic principle that's used on all modern tunnelling projects. Today, most of the work is automated, like on the Crossrail project under London. Here, vast drills cut through the earth, and then the tunnel lining is slid into place. But sometimes workers still have to return to the methods of Brunel's day, using good old-fashioned shovels and spades. On the London Underground's Northern Line extension, they're still manually digging out huge sections of the new line. Melanie Barker is project manager in charge of tunnels.
Melanie, how much does modern tunnelling stem from Brunel's original tunnelling shield?
It absolutely all stems from it. I mean, we wouldn't be able to do what we did without the invention of the shield. The shield essentially protects the workforce and also allows us to move through different types of ground condition. So I don't know if you've seen, but we have timbers in place. That's basically the same as a shield. They put the timbers up, it protects the workforce, it also stabilises the ground and allows us to keep that construction going through whatever ground conditions we face. So yeah, it's absolutely the reason that we can tunnel now is through that invention.
The techniques are similar, but in the pioneering days of tunnelling, the work was far more risky. In January 1828, 2 years into construction, Brunel's Thames Tunnel suffered a major flood. And the young Brunel's career was almost over before it began.
The river broke into the workings, filled the underground chamber, and 6 men drowned in the darkness. This is a moment of sheer panic. Isambard, he's running up and down the tunnel as the floodwaters rise. He has a moment of inspiration, and he thinks of the emergency exit. He climbs that staircase, and the door's bolted. So he's trapped. And then, thank goodness, the man in charge finds an axe, smashes the door, and finds a body inert, lying in the water. He drags the body out, turns it over, and it's Isambard. He's just saved the boss's son's life.
But there was no saving the project. The disaster plunged the Thames Tunnel Company into financial hardship, and in the summer of 1828, all work stopped. For Isambard, this marked a low point in his early career. His anxiety and self-doubt are evident in his private journals of the time.
This is one of, I think, the most extraordinary objects we've got in the collection, and this is the locked diary of Isambard Kingdom Brunel. He kept it as a young man while he was working on the Thames Tunnel. It wasn't for the public, it wasn't for publication, it wasn't for public consumption. This is his thoughts. You can see just at the top here we've got the date, so that's the 6th of April, 1829. So that's a few days before his 23rd birthday.
He says, "What a life, the life of a dreamer. I am always building castles in the air. What time I waste."
Yeah.
That's incredibly reflective, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
quite melodramatic. Almost
questioning himself as an engineer, maybe?
Yeah, he seems to be questioning himself, yeah. And I think this is so interesting because when you think of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, you think of a sort of a brash Victorian, riding trains, building bridges.
Confidence, oozing confidence.
Confidence, cigar in his mouth, hat on, standing in front of these chains. This is a 22-year-old who is worried. He's worried about what's going to happen to him in the future.
This feels very intimate, being here so close to these pages, handwritten by Brunel himself.
The accident in the Thames Tunnel had clearly taken a mental toll on the young Brunel. But he also had to cope with the physical scars.
His injuries were so bad, Brunel was advised to leave London and his tunnel far behind. He agreed and came here, to Bristol. But once he'd arrived, there was to be little time for rest and recuperation.
Brunel formed a bond with the city that survives to this day. His first solo engineering challenge was to produce an iconic work that remains one of Britain's most instantly recognised symbols. The Clifton Suspension Bridge. It remains one of Brunel's greatest legacies. Renowned the world over, it's one of the engineering marvels that made his name. Spanning a breathtaking 200 metres across and standing 75 metres above the River Avon, it's a stunning sight. Brunel arrived in Bristol in 1829, just as the city fathers announced a competition to find an engineer to design a bridge across the Avon Gorge. Young, brash and audacious, Brunel threw his hat into the ring. But he had to work fast.
Astonishingly, in just 7 weeks, Brunel, who'd never worked on a bridge before, came up with 4 separate designs. They were all for suspension bridges, ranging from 760 feet to a staggering 1,180 feet.
Thomas Telford, the renowned engineer who designed and built the Menai Bridge in Wales, was appointed judge of the competition. 22 designs were submitted in total, but Telford rejected them all.
Telford claimed that Brunel's designs would collapse in a strong wind and that it was impossible to build a suspension bridge longer than 600 feet. Funnily enough, that was about the length of Telford's own suspension bridge across the Menai Strait in North Wales.
Telford was eventually asked to submit his own design, but it met with huge disapproval from the people of Bristol. So a second competition was launched, and a familiar entrant came forward.
Brunel cleverly rethought the plans for his bridge, so the span would now be 630 feet across. With an eye for detail that would become one of his trademarks, he designed the towers in a striking Egyptian style. He even intended a sphinx to be sat atop each of the towers.
Brunel's plans were warmly received, and he was finally chosen as the winner. But designing the bridge was only half the battle. Now he had to actually build it. It would be the longest and highest ever seen.
Construction of his Clifton Suspension Bridge finally began on the 27th of August, 1831. But it was a project fraught with problems. 4 months in, the entire operation came to a halt.
The reason? Money. The financial backers for the bridge simply ran out. With the Thames Tunnel project and now the Clifton Suspension Bridge both stalled, Brunel's grand ambitions were being frustrated. Fortuitously, at the same time, a new and revolutionary form of transport was on the horizon. The railways were coming. And it's hard to overestimate what an impact they would have on the nation and the world. Brunel was excited. It gripped his imagination, and he was desperate to get involved. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, built by Brunel's friend and rival Robert Stephenson, was the world's first major rail passenger service. It was December 1831, and Brunel was about to take his first ever ride on a train. When Brunel climbed on board the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, it was the fastest, most revolutionary transport system anywhere in the world. But, characteristically, Brunel was less than impressed. Known for being able to draw a perfect circle freehand, Brunel attempted to draw one in his notebook whilst travelling on Stephenson's train. This is a copy of the page in his notebook where he attempted to draw those circles. They're not brilliant, really. But about this, he wrote in his diary. He says, "I record this specimen of the shaking on the Manchester Railway. The time is not far off when we shall be able to take our coffee and write while going noiselessly and smoothly at 45 miles an hour. He finishes, 'Let me try.'" It was an ambitious claim by Brunel. No one had travelled anywhere near that speed before. But he would soon get the chance to build his own railway. Just a year after Brunel's first train ride, West Country merchants got together to attempt to establish a line from Bristol to London for the first time. And the search began for an engineer. Brunel was one of 4 engineers proposed for the job, and when the Bristol Railway Committee voted, Brunel won, but just by a single vote. With his typical arrogance, he told the committee he would survey only one route from Bristol to London, and it would be the best, but not necessarily the cheapest. On March the 9th, 1833, Brunel set out to plan the route for what would then be the longest railway in the world. It was a project that would obsess him. Author and historian Stephen Brindle has studied Brunel's life. Would you describe him as a workaholic then?
Absolutely chronic workaholic. We know that when he was designing the Great Western Railway, he wrote, "Between ourselves, it is harder work than I like. I'm rarely at it less than 18 hours a day."
Was he a difficult man to work for then?
He would have been a nightmare to work for, yes. He was a very demanding man to all his subordinates. He expected engineers working for him to be at the company's disposal 24-hour day, 7 days a week. I don't think he really understood about holidays, because he hardly ever took them himself.
This punishing round-the-clock schedule meant Brunel was able to plan the route for his Great Western Railway in just 9 weeks. Ingeniously, it would allow him to build a line that was as flat as possible. It would also be built from 2 ends at once, one from London and the other from Bristol. Once the company approved the route, Brunel and his team had to create detailed plans for the new line. After 9 months of arduous work, and with Brunel spending all his time on the road, the plans were ready to present to Parliament. And Parliament eventually approved construction in August 1835. When work finally got going on the Great Western Railway, the starting point was here in Ealing. Just 10 miles to the west of London, Brunel's first major obstacle was this floodplain. Then a vast area of marshland. Now, the cheap and cheerful way through this would have been to build the line down into the dip and then back up out the other side. But that would have slowed Brunel's trains down. So he built this. The Warncliffe Viaduct became the first of Brunel's major structures to be completed. At 900 feet long, with 8 magnificent arches, it was elegant and beautiful, characteristics that would become the Brunel trademark. Still in his late 20s, Brunel was often working over 18 hours a day. ever the workaholic, he was obsessed with building the world's longest railway. Then, in 1832, out of the blue, his head was turned, as Brunel, the great engineer, suddenly fell in love. In 1836, Brunel was 30 years old and busier than ever. He was working on the Warncliffe Viaduct for his Great Western Railway. Construction on the massive Clifton Suspension Bridge had started again, and work on the Thames Tunnel was back underway. A few years earlier, in 1832, the work-obsessed engineer had met socialite Mary Horsley. She was the daughter of an accomplished musical composer, and Brunel was introduced to the family by his brother-in-law. He attended musical recitals at their home in Kensington. On a family walk one evening in May 1836, Brunel proposed. Just 2 months later, Isambard and Mary were married, and unusually for Brunel, he took a 2-week break for their honeymoon in North Wales. Just a year later, in 1837, they had their first of 3 children, Isambard Jr. Although little evidence of the Brunel's family life exists, one significant letter seems to highlight how he struggled emotionally in his relationship with his wife.
This is unique in our archive. This is a letter written by Brunel to his wife, Mary. He's working, doing Great West Railway work, and he's got to a hotel, and he says, because he couldn't get to see her, he's going to write her a long letter instead. But in it, he describes, quite humorously, the room that he's staying in. So he doesn't think much of it. He says that there's lots of doors, they're ill-fitted, that they're locked, but you can still crawl underneath them. You can actually see, he's even done a little sketch here.
So this is in a letter to his wife, which he said, "No, I'm missing you, darling. I want to come and see you, but instead I'll write you a letter. But actually, I'm going to complain about the things I see around me, that's what's not quite right."
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, he's sitting down and he's looking around, and he's just describing what he sees in front of him. Being an engineer, obviously, he's picking out all the defects in the room, and maybe he's working out how he could fix them in his head as well.
By 1837, Brunel's Great Western Railway was taking up even more of his time as he pushed further west. One of his greatest challenges was getting across the River Thames at Maidenhead. Here, Brunel faced a conundrum that seemed impossible to solve. The Thames River authorities demanded that any bridge built at this point needed to be high enough to allow sailing barges to pass underneath. Now, it's a fairly wide stretch of river here, over 100 yards across, but the authorities would only allow Brunel 2 arches for his bridge. Never a man to shirk a challenge, Brunel set about solving the puzzle. It would result in one of his most elegant bridge designs, and still to this day, an engineering record holder. Brunel came up with a solution that satisfied the Thames River authorities and allowed him to keep his railway line level. He built these 2 magnificently graceful arches. 28 feet high, the minimum he had to provide to let the barges sail underneath, and a staggering 128 feet wide. Now, those dimensions give you these kind of squashed arches that you can see. And they're absolutely beautiful. Beautiful, but also practical and record-breaking. Today, they remain the widest brick arches anywhere on Earth. The Maidenhead Bridge officially opened in 1839, and it's still standing here today, successfully carrying thousands of passengers and hundreds of trains every day. One of the fun consequences of Brunel's arches here at Maidenhead is you do get the most fantastic echo. As well as being the longest railway, Brunel insisted that his GWR line should also be the widest.
When you ride on a train in the UK, you'll be riding on track called standard gauge, and that's this far apart. Building his Great Western Railway, Brunel wanted to expand on this standard gauge, quite literally. And his much wider track here was called broad gauge.
That also meant designing brand new broad gauge trains from scratch. Requiring huge driving wheels on either side of the engine, it meant his GWR trains would look very different from those elsewhere in the country. Brunel believed they would provide his passengers with a faster and smoother ride. He had ultimate faith in his broad gauge and was determined to force the plans through.
The fact that he could persuade the Great Western Railway's board to move from the standard gauge, 4 foot 8 inches, which is what it otherwise would have been, to adopt his broad gauge, indicates tremendous self-belief and there's certainly a quality of arrogance there. Brunel was a brilliant communicator, and he had a remarkable ability to persuade people, really formidable, hard-nosed businessmen, to adopt his ideas, even when this involved spending huge sums of money.
Ultimately, Brunel's radical broad gauge would be replaced by the more common standard gauge. But during his lifetime, Brunel insisted that his preference would win out. His Great Western Railway line was built from both ends simultaneously, from London heading west and from Bristol heading east. The plan was for them to meet somewhere in the middle. But the final hurdle to join the two ends up presented the engineer with his biggest challenge yet.
One of the greatest obstacles facing Brunel and his brand new railway was this hill here in the village of Box in Wiltshire. It was simply too big to go around. So Brunel decided in order to see his dream complete, there was only one solution. He'd have to go right through the middle of it.
But how to build what would then be the longest tunnel in the world? First, he had to get his workmen inside the hill. Much like the Thames Tunnel, Brunel sunk a number of shafts to get his men deep inside Box Hill to begin the digging out process.
Some of Brunel's access shafts that lead down to the Box Tunnel still exist. You just need to know where to look. Wow. At the bottom of these shafts, which are up to 300 feet deep, Brunel's men began work on the tunnel itself. And it's only when you're up here and you can look straight down that you get a real sense of just how daunting a task that must have been.
This is the Camborne College of Mining in Cornwall. Here they have a network of tunnels that replicate the 19th century conditions at Box Hill. Mark Kashmarek is an expert in mining and tunnelling. He's showing me the process of making a railway tunnel Victorian style. We're in an area of the tunnel with a similar type of rock that Brunel's men faced at Box Hill.
So we've reached a bit of a dead end here, Mark. This is the working face of one of the mines down here.
Yeah.
Imagine we're in the Box Tunnel, though,
Yeah.
with one of Brunel's navvies. How are we going to get through all this rock?
You're listening for the sound of the rock.
Yeah.
If the rock rings when you hit it with a pick, you know it's solid.
Yeah.
If you get a dull sound, you know that rock has to come off.
All right, so if I have a go here, just have a...
Yeah, go.
I mean, that is proper solid, isn't it?
The first task that Brunel's navvies encountered was to clear away all the loose rock at the face.
There we go. So I can pick that out. So having worked away the kind of, well, the slightly more looser rock, and you got to the really solid rock face, what was the process then?
The process then was to bring in the miners who could drill the holes, and they had to be drilled and blasted. The pick could do no more against the solid rock, so you had to undermine it by drilling holes. So what I'm going to do, with each blow, I'm going to turn this drill so it actually cuts its way into the rock.
So by turning it, it helps us drill and drive our way into that rock.
So you hit it, watch my hands.
All right.
I'm going to hold it down here.
Just you have faith in me, Mark.
Yeah, I do. Oh, there you are.
All right. So you're just giving it that little turn every time.
Yep.
It was important that the miners drilled the holes at an angle into the rock face. If they were straight, the gunpowder would be blown right back out, like a bullet from a gun.
I mean, I'm feeling the pressure here doing this now. You can imagine what the navvies would have been like. Every time they were doing this, there was a risk of something going wrong, a risk of someone becoming injured and potentially losing their lives.
The worst thing was misfires. So if it didn't go off, if you walk back in, if the fuse had only burnt slightly and then stopped, just you walking back in because it caused a draft and the fuse starts going again and people got blown up that way.
Such dangerous work. Let's do it, shall we?
Yeah, charge your hole,
So I'm going to place that in there.
push that in very carefully.
Once the gunpowder charge is pushed into the hole, it's then sealed with soft clay.
So the clay keeps
Wedges it in.
It keeps all the gases in the hole, so all the energy from the explosion breaks the rock.
So ready to light the fuse now, all set.
There's a candle behind you,
Whee!
and now we walk.
There it goes.
Once the workmen had retreated to a safe distance, they waited. Then they went back to the scarred rock face to start the process all over again.
The work went on for 3 years. 1,100 men working constantly around the clock in conditions we can't even imagine. Astonishingly, in the blasting of Box Tunnel, Brunel's men went through a ton of candles and a ton of gunpowder every single week.
And many of those men paid with their lives. In all, more than 100 were killed as they pushed through almost 2 miles deep into the Wiltshire countryside. Although the work inside was brutal, Brunel insisted that the exterior should be as handsome as possible.
With the Box Tunnel finally complete, Brunel had at last joined up all the sections of his beautiful railway. And on the 30th of June 1841, the Great Western Railway carried passengers for the very first time from London all the way to Bristol.
But ever the visionary, Brunel could see beyond the Great Western Railway line. In fact, such was his searing ambition, he'd worked out a way to extend the journey all the way to America. He was now looking to the potential of steamships plying their trade across the Atlantic. He understood that building the biggest and best vessels would shrink the world. There was, however, one small problem.
Brunel had no knowledge on how to build ships, but, as ever, that didn't stop him.
Bridges, railways, and ships. Isambard Kingdom Brunel revolutionized Britain with his bold ideas and brilliant designs. By now, Brunel and his wife Mary had moved into an imposing 4-storey house in fashionable Duke Street in London. Ever the workaholic, Brunel equipped it to accommodate his teams of draftsmen and clerks. His work was as demanding as ever, and he was now involved in yet another new project. Whilst building his Great Western Railway, he convinced his financial backers to establish a regular steamship service across the Atlantic to New York. Incredibly, even as his railway remained under construction, he produced radical plans for a huge new vessel. In 1835, he came up with an idea that foresaw the largest ship ever built at the time: the SS Great Western.
236 feet long, over 1,300 tons in weight, mainly built from oak but with a copper-lined hull. Ambitious? Certainly.
But at the time, it was believed a ship so big wouldn't be able to carry enough coal to cross the Atlantic, with room left over for cargo or passengers. Brunel didn't agree. According to 19th century conventional wisdom, the amount of coal a steamship could carry increased in direct proportion to the size of the ship. So a vessel twice as big could only carry twice as much coal. But Brunel spotted a mathematical flaw in that argument. At Ferguson Marine Shipyard in Glasgow, naval architect Chris Dunn explained Brunel's theory.
We've got three models here. They're exactly the same shape, but they're increasing in size, so everything's proportional.
Yes.
The first one here is 362 cubic centimeters of displacement.
That's the volume.
That's the volume that holds when it's in the water.
Yes.
This one here, almost 3 times as much with 1,000, and this one here, 3 times as much again as 3,000. If the weight of the ship itself, the structure of the ship, is only doubling, while the volume is tripling, then there's this extra capacity that you can use to carry the cargo, and that was his theory.
What Brunel argued was simple. If you double the size of an object, its length, breadth and height, the volume inside that object, the space available, actually increases way more than just double.
And that's it exactly, isn't it? So building a bigger ship, the big ships that Brunel wanted to build, you are doubling and doubling the size of the ship, but you're tripling and tripling the volume. You're getting more capacity inside the ship to carry the coal, to get you across the Atlantic, and to carry cargo to make it commercially viable.
Absolutely, and that's the key to the whole thing, to make a ship commercially viable, to carry the cargo. They're not doing this to carry coal back and forth across the sea, they're doing it to carry more cargo.
Brunel had convinced his backers that the SS Great Western would work, that it could steam across the Atlantic and carry enough coal for the journey. What he didn't expect was that there'd be serious competition to claim the prize for the first steam-powered transatlantic crossing.
On the 4th of April 1838, a steamship called the Sirius had set out from Cork, heading across the Atlantic, bound for New York, 4 days before the Great Western. She arrived just 12 hours ahead of Brunel's ship and had to burn cabin furniture and a mast to complete the journey. When Brunel's Great Western arrived, however, she still had 200 tons of coal on board. Brunel's Great Western proved beyond doubt the viability of a commercial transatlantic steamship service.
She plied her trade across the Atlantic for 8 years, from 1838 to 1846. And after serving as a troop carrier in the Crimean War, she was eventually scrapped in 1856.
By then, the fruits of Brunel's other labours were visible right across Britain. On the 10th of January 1842, the Thames Tunnel at last opened to the public. And in Bristol, construction of the Clifton Suspension Bridge had finally restarted. Brunel had become the most sought-after and celebrated engineer in the land.
At the height of his activity, Brunel was engaged on hundreds of projects. Just looking at a list of the railway lines he was building, you realise what a staggering amount of work he was involved in. He was building the Merthyr and Cardiff Railway. He was building the Wiltshire, Somerset and Weymouth Railway, the Bristol and Exeter Railway, the Cheltenham Railway, the South Wales Railway. The list just goes on and on and on. It makes you tired just reading your way through it. It's mind-boggling.
But Brunel was still obsessed with pushing the boundaries of engineering. Next time, we'll see how he came up with a revolutionary new design that changed the future of shipbuilding forever. How a radical reinvention of the railway almost cost him his career. And how his final mammoth project took a terrible personal toll.